So what should we tackle?
There's stuff I should plug. Um, I should plug our webinar. We did a webinar. I saw Sasha Ayad very kindly plugged it, like advanced plug. I'll now retro plug it. We did a webinar on rapid onset gender dysphoria, and it was really good because we had three professionals and we had a parent. And honestly, if it had just been the three professionals, it would have been fine. It would have been really good, but it would have been quite kind of clinical, I think. And having a parent in the mix was really powerful. Like, so we had David Bell, who was ex-governor of the Tavistock, which is the whole epicenter of this, the Kira Bell case and all the rest of it in the UK. We had Lisa Littman, who wrote the paper which allowed Abigail Schreier then to write her book. So she's the one who coined the term rapid onset gender dysphoria. And we had Stella O'Malley, who's the founder of GenSpect. And then we had a parent called Jude from Australia. And she just told her story, like start to finish. She wrote it down, spoke for half an hour. And at the end of it, David Bell kind of had to follow her. And he was like, I don't know how to follow that. It was like, because it really brings it home what it actually is that people are dealing with in all of this. So that was really good. And it's kind of exciting because we got some big names to come along, just some clinician big names, who are kind of people who are kind of, people who are a bit on the fence. They sort of think this might have gone too far, but on the other hand, we're worried, blah, blah, blah. So it was good. That was good. And I should also plug, we've released 2 websites. We've released statsforgender.org. And so that's, well, don't really need to explain what that is, right? That's Stats for Gender. Anything to do with this whole situation. And then there's a brilliant website which some parents did, which is called genspectunheard.org. And it's just parents telling their story of what's happened in their family in like 4 minutes. And I think that's quite powerful, or it seems to have proven very powerful. It's made a lot of people cry. It hasn't made me cry, but I'm not like the kind of person who cries a lot.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But yeah.
You're
so that's good.
Criminal.
Well, I think it's useful. I think there's something about being able to hear somebody tell their story in their own voice, which changes it, as opposed to somebody else saying it. So, yeah. And then, apart from that, I've been sick, but I'm now officially not sick because I'm bored of being sick. You get to a point where you're sick and then you're like, yeah, I'm done with this. I'm just going to pretend I'm not. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, hopefully the herpes will listen to you and you're well.
No, it's not herpes. It's what's the one that makes you go blind and then mad?
Oh, masturbation.
Syphilis?
Oh, syphilis. Okay.
No, it's syphilis. Yeah. No, it's the syphilis. Yeah. So it's been kind of productive, and I'm looking forward to having a bit of a break over Christmas. But then, having said that, I'm also going to write a book about. It's just going to be like what I did with the Quillette series, but it's going to be boys and girls, the whole lot. So parents kind of telling their stories to me and then me writing them up. And then we're going to release that as a book. To my knowledge, there isn't anyone who's written a book entirely about the parent experience before. Mm-hmm. I could be wrong on that, but I think I'm right in saying that.
I am not aware of such a thing, which doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But to backtrack just a bit, you said something to the effect of it was good for people to hear what parents are actually going through on this topic when you were talking about the GenSpect conference that you guys did. What is it that parents are actually going through?
I think the big thing that they would want other people to know is just the stuff that objectively you would say is negative. Like, for example, there's this pattern that we're seeing now where these kids start taking hormones and their personal hygiene just goes through the floor. They stop stripping the bed, they stop, you know, showering and things like that. And that's just objectively bad. I mean, there's nobody who would ever say, well, that's part of the development of an identity, right?
I've
And
heard
you hear
that
that
from
so much.
several
Yeah,
detransitioners.
yeah. And I saw a tweet in my new Twitter presence where somebody was basically saying, like, all it took for me to do to get over my gender dysphoria was basically I just stopped going on social media and I started going out. And then you can see a pattern. You can see that that's going to make you do things like have a shower. And there was a mother I spoke to the other day who, for some reason, she's still got like the ability to see where her daughter goes, you know, like with her phone. I don't think there's anything sinister. I don't think she's tracking her without her knowledge. It's just like one of these share my location things. And basically, her daughter just goes to the weed dispensary and then home. And kind of occasionally to the pharmacy to get hormones, and that's just it. So I think that's one of the big things the parents really want to say, which, because it's kind of like the picture is I'm living my best life, you know, everything's fine now, and the parents are like, yeah, but you're not. I can see you're not. You know, when you've got like, and sometimes there's eating disorders. The hygiene collapse thing is really big, and it's something that I'm not even sure how many of the gender clinics would or even could know about that. Do you know what I mean? How would you know? Because you prescribe the hormones and then the kid goes away, and until surgery, then there's not that much monitoring. And in fairness, if they're adults, it's like, well, the clinics aren't going to call them like, you know, like your grandma might call you or something. They're not going to have any way of knowing. So that's a big thing that people want to get out. And then, you know, I think that the social isolation, which kind of the replacement of the friendship group is an important part of this, you know, because you're sort of switching either an existing friendship group for a new friendship group, or no friendship group for a new friendship group, but one which isn't terribly positive. And I think that's something that, hold on, I think that's something that parents want to say. I think they want to get it out there that these kids are falling in with a new circle of people. And it's complicated to talk about because they don't want their kids to be friendless. Do you know what I mean? But at the same time, there are all sorts of implications that come from that new circle. And this goes back to the definition of ROGD, right? That they just kind of all their friends are trans.
There's a saying that Sasha will say sometimes that no therapy is better than bad therapy. Maybe no friends are better than bad friends.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I'm sure that they're good friends in some ways, you know, like there's got to be something in it for the kid. And I think if you're like this lonely, outcasty, dumpy girl, and then suddenly you're a trans man or whatever, I can see that you would get something from it. You would get, if nothing else, you'd get company from it. But you're climbing up a ladder in a lot of cases where it's very difficult to get down. And so then you speak to somebody like Sinead and the kind of the treason of detransition because you're turning on a friendship group.
So what have you been working on recently then? Are you still collating and collecting stories from parents and helping out with these various organizations? Is there any new discoveries?
Yeah,
Any turning of your
I
screws that are occurring?
maybe. I think so. I think I understand a lot more about this community and this phenomenon, I was very much kind of only really understanding the boys and interested in the boys, the male to female. And now I think I'm catching up and learning about the girls as well, because now I'm representing like a large number of parents or working for them and helping them build resources and da da da. And so I suppose that's been a bit of a voyage of discovery.
So going from my arc was interviewing detransitioners, most of which have been female, and it's been difficult for me to speak with males, though I have, and I have another one in the pipeline right now, work that I'm going to publish. And when we first spoke, we were talking kind of about the boys and highlighting that with some new information about this cohort, this group, this generation. And you are going from the boys to the girls. So what, from your point of view, what is changing when you go from looking and learning about the boys' experience and then going and looking at the girls' experience? What are kind of the major differences in that?
Less than you'd think. That would be my headline, less than you'd think. I suppose the big difference is that ROGD, if we're accepting that there's a thing called ROGD, rapid onset gender dysphoria or adolescent or whatever, I think the lines of that are clearer and cleaner with the girls. It's easier to kind of spot that and point at it and go, yeah, I know what that is. That's rapid onset gender dysphoria. Whereas with the boys, for a start, if you look at the distributional curve of age for the boys, if you look at really, really young kids who are gender dysphoric and then middle-aged adults who suddenly decide they want to transition, that's more male. The girls are bunched around adolescence, basically adolescence and young adulthood, the girls bunch. And the boys kind of are more of a flatten the curve. And so that the consequence of that is it's a bit difficult to work out, okay, where does this adolescent rapid onset gender dysphoria begin and end, and where is the line of autogynephilia and the middle-aged autogynephilia? Because there's kind of this idea that the boys fit into three categories, like early onset, pre-gay, hyper-feminine, then the teenage group, and then the middle-aged AGP. And yeah, good luck drawing the boundaries.
Okay.
There, trying to, it's quite difficult. Whereas with the girls, there's so few very, very, very young, and there's so few, I don't know, middle-aged or at least, post 30. I don't even think I've heard of a girl doing this after the age of like 26 or 27, starting to trans-identify after that age. I don't know, you might correct me on that.
There should be a conversation about and with the lesbian community about that, because I'm sure that there's retroactive transmasculinization of lesbians. Say, why not? I never needed this. I never wanted this.
That's true. There's Carol, isn't there? There's Carol, who's a detransitioner. She started trans-identifying quite late in life, I think. Yeah, okay, yeah. But broadly, I would stand by that and say that it's kind of more the girls form a more cohesive sort of cohort. That would be the big thing I've learned, and so that makes it difficult for the parents of boys. I also think there's a big sympathy gap. That it's a lot easier, particularly in the gender critical social media world, I think, to talk about the issues facing girls than to talk about the issues facing boys.
It's easier to talk about girls than boys. Is that what you said? I just want to make sure that.
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. Or not necessarily easier to talk about, but easier to garner sympathy for them.
Mm-hmm. I think that there's despite what some would say, it's we do have there's a word for it. We have a gynocentric There's some sort of sociological tendency for people to empathize and sympathize and feel compassion for females rather than males. I just think it's in our culture now. Whether or not that translates into a absence of misogyny with regards to certain behaviors or even power plays that happen across the sexes, I still do think that women are easier to sympathize with, and especially young women from certain points of view. Though that could be argued that that's packaged with other things that aren't so nice. And I don't mean to make it seem like women have it easy and men don't, or vice versa, but just with regards to storytelling, and especially within the GC-led movement around trans issues, most of them are women, and so of course they're going to be focusing on women and having a much more direct desire to lift up the voices and protect girls rather than boys. But then also, and I think we've mentioned this before, when we're talking about males come packaged with this thing called male sexuality, and the GC community has some pretty they're pretty wary about male sexuality to such an extent that whenever it does pop up, they like to play whack-a-mole with it. Not all of them, but that's kind of the tendency.
Well, it doesn't need to be all of them. It just needs to be one or two. And yeah, I mean, so do you know who James Dreyfus is?
That sounds very familiar.
He's a British actor. He's gay, and he kind of came out as gender critical or whatever we're calling it, skeptical about some of the stuff that's going on. And he was retroactively stripped of some accolade. He played like, is it a Time Lord or something in Doctor Who? And then they released a box set and they had everyone but him. Like he was kind of Orwelled out of Doctor Who. And yeah, there was this weird thing where people just started attacking him for just for being a man. Like, why are you speaking about this? You shouldn't be speaking about this. Women should be speaking about this. And you kind of think, yeah, that's not clever. There's no universe in which that's a good tactic.
Well, I mean, I understand it from a tendency towards seeing the opposite of that, which I think, and this is very British centric. Owen Jones is a prominent gay man who is pushing the trans agenda, or whacking down on TERFs every chance that he can get. And there are a number of different high profile males that are doing that. So I see that women in the GC movement have cause to be very wary of males. But again, part of the trajectory of the movement is that I think that the GC females should be given a lot of accolades and respect for starting this and doing a lot of the being ahead of the curve on this. But if for it to be a cultural matter, they're going to have to allow other groups and other interests involved in that. And you see that with Radfems in America aligning with the conservatives, and then how there's a lot of infighting with are we going to let the conservatives own this movement and stuff? And it's interesting, and it's inside baseball, but hopefully people understand that the issue is much bigger than feminism. We're talking about children. We're talking about an entire generation. We're talking about basically eugenics, which affects everyone, not just females and not just the feminist ideology.
And also, I think that nearly all of the women who would be in a kind of broadly framed GC community do want to cooperate with other people. I think it's a very, very small number. And then there's an understandable reticence to say, like, to take that on when you do see it. But it's very counterproductive, because you've got somebody like James Dreyfus or Graham Linehan or whatever. Graham Linehan's just, he's just still going. He's still going at it. He's still pointing out these things. I mean, even this week we've got like this scout leader, male to female. Have you seen this?
Are you talking about Boy Scouts, or is this some sort of British Brit Scouts? What do you guys have over there?
Girl Guides, I think, which is like Girl Scouts, whatever. Girl Guides. It's a Girl Guides, I think.
But it's a Girl Guide.
Which is what we would call.
Girl guide.
It's a girl. Wait, hold on. It's a guy's
Guy,
girl,
girl,
girl
girl,
guide.
girl. Yeah, guys, girl, girl, girl. Okay, okay, okay. Good.
Is this a drinking game we're doing now? Guide,
Oh,
girl,
I
girl
don't
guide.
know. Well, you're in
And
the. You could start drinking if you want. It's too early for me.
well, it's 7 a.m. somewhere. So yeah, there's this male to female, and basically kind of in like bondage gear and stuff, like saying I'm going to whip you and all the rest of it, and is like some regional Girl Scout leader in the UK, and the Girl Guiding Association is just kind of doing an ostrich and saying, yeah, we don't really have anything to say about that yet. And people like Graham, and and I'm not saying because they're men, I'm just saying it's not only women.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something which I suppose I just didn't know as much about. So I've kind of learned that there's a tension there, which is not helpful, because I'd like us to be able to stay focused on the child transition, basically just stay focused on the child transition, and I've got my opinions about all the other things which are touched by the gender ideology, but it's such an important topic that we have to stay on that. We can't kind of go roving off and start talking about prisons and sports and all the rest of it.
There's a whole network, but if we're just talking about transition, here's a question for you. It might be a gray area with regards to our friendship being tested by me asking this, but you're dealing with parents. Parents are generally heterosexual, generally in a marriage, or the child generally comes from a male and a female interacting and then being married, or some sort of dynamic between male and female. As a gay man, how is it for you to interact with parents? Is there any sort of ideological transition or opening or learning that you're gaining from the relationship between male and female as a man who is homosexual? Like, are you given any insight into the dynamics between male and female with regards to parenting by dealing with this issue?
That's a really good question. Am I given any insights into the dynamics between male and female? I wouldn't want to extrapolate from this community to the wider population necessarily, because there are reasons to consider it different. Because you get the same features which come up over and over again. And to be honest, a lot of them do seem like genetic features. There are things which are, how every family has its certain ways and certain traits, and you get these commonalities of these traits which account for nearly everyone who's in this situation. And it's not just the kid, it's the parents as well, and it's the whole family. So I'd be cautious about extrapolating from that. And I think the other thing to say is, like, 96% of the parents who are involved in the gender dysphoria support network are mothers. So it's kind of difficult to draw that many conclusions about the fathers. I have met a few, but it's really only, like, how long have I been in this now? I don't know, like 15 months or something. And it's only after I've been speaking to somebody for a long time, I've met a couple of the husbands.
Oh, what have you learned then about just mothering and the relationship between mothers and sons, maybe mothers and daughters?
I think that you can construe this whole thing as an attack on motherhood and not fatherhood specifically. There, I would be very comfortable making an argument that this is an attack on women and not on men, that it's an attack on mothers and not on fathers. There's so much evidence for that.
Okay. Could we expand on that and make a kind of a detailed picture?
There's so many things, like where the kid will say, this is my new name, these are my pronouns, and the father seems to be under very little pressure to do it, and he can kind of say, yeah, I'm maybe not going to do that, or maybe I'll do that, but I'm not going to really be on trial over it. And the kid doesn't seem that bothered, whereas the mother gets into the territory where it's like, okay, yes, you're using the correct name and the correct pronouns, but I know that you're still thinking about the old pronouns, so you need to change your facial expression. The mothers are really held to account way more than the fathers. Very often, it's with the fathers, it doesn't feel like they're being tested in the same way. I think you and I have also spoken about the cheerleader character, that a lot of these kids will have a very influential female friend, nearly always female friend, who's kind of a cheerleader and going, yeah, go on, transition, transition.
Yeah.
I've heard so many stories where the cheerleader character is going for the trans-identified kid's mother, particularly. Like doing things like saying what's the opposite of a dead name? A living name, the trans name, like at 3 times the volume.
Undead name?
And 3 times undead. Yeah, exactly. The name of the walking undead. Saying that at like 3 times the volume and 3 times the frequency, and giving pointed glances at the mother as that's going on, and things like getting Christmas cards in the post with the new name, like in big glitter, and asking, did your mother see it? Specifically, did your mother see it? Not who saw it. Yeah.
Wow.
It's interesting, right?
That is really rich, man.
And not just that, also schools. I think a lot of the time the 2 parents will go in. So if there's a conflict, like if a school is starting to socially transition a kid and the parents aren't on board with it, usually both parents will go in, and there will be some, diversity person, and it will all be channeled at the mother. The mother is ultimately seen as the decision maker. So the fathers kind of seem, if you wanted to be very generous, you could say the fathers are being sidelined. If you wanted to be much more critical, you could say the fathers aren't stepping up. And I mean, of course, that's ridiculously general, because these are all different families. But it does seem very mother-directed.
Well, I mean, we don't know why, but we can hypothesize why.
We can.
Is it because mothers are seen as supposed to be, I don't know, there's some really rich stuff in there. There's some huge questions on why that would be cropping up. So what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it would be fairly rash to say it's completely unrelated to the fact that a lot of these kind of very left of center teachers, if they were teaching like a fairly normal, academically normal, let's say 17-year-old kid, girl, and said to her, what are you going to do with your life? And she said, I want to start a family. So, I'm going to, get a job and try and meet somebody. That would be treated with deep contempt now, I think, by a lot of these teachers. It would be seen as like a failure that's your life goal, to have a family. Whereas I don't know that boys would be treated with that level of contempt. They'd be less likely to say it. So you can see it as part of a devaluing of motherhood across the board, in a way that and maybe the corollary of that is that motherhood is getting devalued and fatherhood is getting turned into something less and less relevant.
You might say that fatherhood had already been devalued over the course of decades, which I think that might be fair to say with regards to the education system, that men have been devalued over time. At least you see that with regards to male achievement, the gap between male and female achievement, and the way in which the education system, at least in America, caters more to female, caters to educational context that females can get ahead in. And then that completely follows through with post-high school, post-secondary education with the distribution there. And then you have a lot of educators in secondary and primary education that are female anyway. And one might ask to what degree they put their family on hold or decided not to become a mother and became a teacher instead. And so there might be some sort of culture there.
I just think they need to buy pot plants. I think just go
What?
and buy a plant and look after the plant because they're interfering so much in these kids' lives. And I think, go and have your own kid. And if you don't want your own kid, buy a cat. And if you don't want a cat, buy a cactus. Just, there's a horrible evangelism to some of the stuff we're seeing going on in schools. And I do think it's gay men and straight women. I don't think it's lesbians pushing that, and I don't think it's straight men. I think it's androphiles. It's people who are drawn to men broadly who are pushing gender ideology. When you think about it, it's mainly gay men and straight women who are really pushing this. And what do gay men and straight women have in common?
They're oriented towards...
Sexually drawn to men. Yeah.
Well, okay, sexually drawn to men, but there might be some sort of psychological spin that's more mattress-centric or something. But if mothers are being devalued by the people in the schools, it might be because they assume that the school or the state or the institution is the mother, and the parents are simply those who offer the child to the state. It might be that the parents are secondary and the child is owned by the culture, which would be a perhaps consequence of thinking that everything is socially constructed, meaning that the biology doesn't matter, and also that the biological connection between the child and the parents doesn't matter. What matters is socialization, and therefore the child belongs to the culture that molds them. Maybe,
but they're not doing a very good job at caring. And it's much more like the kind of teenage tearaway rebel bad influence role, I would argue, that some of these teachers are playing and that some of the cultural figures are playing. I think they believe that they're helping young people break free from something harmful. So it's, and you just hear over and over again, you hear the mother just she'll be describing a million different situations, and it could be the therapist's office, it could be the head teacher, it could be the cheerleader, the kid's best friend, where she just kind of naively and innocently stumbles into a situation thinking, okay, well, I'm 2 weeks into learning about this trans thing, and is treated as though she is like the epicenter of evil, really extreme behavior that sometimes is leveled at these mothers, and it's not leveled at the fathers. So that's one thing I'm fairly certain. I would be quite confident in saying this whole thing is an attack on motherhood.
By androphiles.
By androphiles.
That's really
by straight women and gay men.
Huh.
Yeah. There's another imbalance as well, which is that this is a bit philosophical and a bit abstract, but...
Great.
Great, he whispers. Generally, I think the audience for the girls doing this is other girls. When I say the audience, I know people might object to that, but you know what I mean by that. The people at whom it's directed and the people who provide the social context, which this all bounces off, and the people that these kids are going to for approval. So the girls are doing it for the girls, and that's not surprising because we know everything about social contagion, moving within female peer groups, and girls being influential on one another. I think the boys are doing it for the girls. I don't think they're doing it for other boys to see. I think some of them are kind of putting themselves in this kind of very barbified, almost asexual role. And then some of them, it's autogynephilia, which is, I would argue that's female-directed as a sexuality. It's self-directed, but it's also female-directed. Yeah. So the audience is all female. Right, the context in which this is happening, it's very female waters in which this is going on. Even something like autogynephilia, which is very, it's male sexuality. So,
but the male becomes the object of desire and also the witness of the object of desire. So insofar as the man turns into the female that he wants to be, he also sees himself through the female that he wants to be too. So maybe it's a circuit. And it's got to be not just
It's a
sexual; it's got to
circuit,
be
but
psychological too.
yeah, but there's also an aspect of autogynephilia which is narcissistic and where being seen is a sex act, and it's being seen by women. It's not being seen by men. They're not really interested in being whether they're seen by men and how they're seen by men.
Well, Jamie Shoup, when he opened up to me, he said that in his fervor, his AGP fervor, he would go and seek sex with men as a female, and that concentrated. So the males treating him as a woman concentrated or fulfilled that, gratified that compulsion for him. But it was,
Okay.
but and this is in adult theaters and stuff like that. So there's that. But on a contrary data point, and this is just one data point, there's one of the central characters of the Evergreen State College fiasco was a male who identified as femme, but who was kind of a gay
I
male,
know exactly who you are
and
talking about.
he ended up creating and collating females around him, and then he would make these social media posts denouncing men for not liking him, denouncing men for not loving him, and kind of denouncing straight men because he wants them and he wants them to want him. And,
Yeah. What he's really doing is just bartering tokens from the possibly very legitimate resentment of some of those women, right? Because we all resent one another because we're flawed and fallible and human, and the line between good and evil runs through every human heart. So it's kind of, he's playing this little game of saying, like, oh, men are attacking me, men make the world worse. And he's surrounding himself with this coterie of women. And that's kind of like feeding pigeons, right, with bread. It's like just throwing them stuff. He doesn't really care about them, I would argue. I know the person you're talking about. I forget his name, and I'm not sure the conversation will be improved by saying it.
yeah,
Horrible
no,
person. Really,
well,
obviously, like radiates from him. In my view, that's just my opinion.
but he was playing into the trans identity, and it was just a really weird. It was like he was just calling himself a femme. So I just think that he verifies what you're saying because his audience was always collected and formed of women, and I'm sure that he controlled that because men were really difficult for him to control.
And let's be fair, in turn, those women are in a culture where they're straight white women. That's not great, right? So, so they're looking for reasons to kind of feel that they've been structurally damaged by systems and all the rest of it. I mean, this thing just kind of kills everything at this point.
What do you mean? It kills
There's
everything.
I think it's just killing our culture. All of this, the oppression points stuff is really, really damaging. I think it's killing TV shows. You can actively watch season by season this logic kill a TV show. I'm just watching season 2 of The Morning Show with Jennifer Aniston, and it's a clown car crash. It's dreadful compared to the first season, which was actually, it was about the Me Too movement, and I thought it was really nicely done. I thought it was really nice. It gave everyone their dues and it presented it as complex. And this season has just fallen apart. It's full of people screeching at one another about their protected characteristics, and it's just really unwatchable. So
I
think
it's
yeah.
also destroying businesses too. I know somebody who is in a managerial position at a business, and she started there, and there were a lot of they thems, a lot of female they thems, and one they them male who was undergoing transition, and every single one of the they thems was just a total pain to work with, and was just always interrupting the business and calling each other out and causing a lot of really difficult situations behind the counter and front end counter, just like how the business operates. And over the course of time, they were just slowly phased out and then replaced with people who aren't signaling. It seems like every young person that's signaling this they them or gender ideology has a lot of other issues and is demanding everybody else cater to them across all levels, not just with the pronouns, but with when I get to show up to work, how everybody treats me at work, how everybody treats each other at work. There's just so much, and they have no skill and so much entitlement at the same time. And so this ideology, insofar as it's connected to other ideologies of the same ilk, is just producing a bunch of kids that will ruin businesses. And then we have a workforce, or we don't have a workforce for these entry-level positions, because every entry-level position that will be filled, which will maybe, just to end my thought, maybe that will help Gen Xers, millennials, and boomers who are overqualified will now be seen as, okay, they're overqualified, but they're safe because we don't have to deal with the bullshit.
Yeah, they're qualified in not being a completely narcissistic diva. So, you get like an A for that, and you're good, and as long as you can do like basic arithmetic. Yeah, it was interesting. I heard you say, I can't remember who it was to, but you said like one of your podcasts that you felt like we'd just gone from boomer to zoomer and skipped over. Was it you, or was it one of your guests who said that and skipped over the middle bit? And I agree that I think that could be the thing which wrangles it back, because there's a huge skills shortage. Huge now. It's I think America would be an obvious example. Another obvious example would be Scotland, which is just devastatingly bad in the PISA rankings, like the educational rankings. It's really at the bottom of the developed world now, I think, nearly, more or less. Okay. And which is really kind of something, because it's a society of engineers, historically at least, it's engineers and economists, and it's pretty sad to see that happening. And there is, the institutional capture is bad up there, in schools and so forth. I mean, there's only so many hours in the day, so what are you going to teach?
Yeah, exactly.
Are you going to teach this? Are you going to teach? Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that it's a dual attack, not just on motherhood as a representative of social development and the development of the self and the internal development, but also the capture of fatherhood by making skills and everything that would be outward focused and quantifiable, like math skills, engineering skills, all that stuff is pushed out. So so the attack is on everything that's kind of basically patriarchal, like just like work and systems and stuff like that. And then also everything that's kind of basically matriarchal, which would be identity and the human skill sets, and then all the social skills that mothers are particularly keen at. Verbal skills come through the mother into the child a lot, and social skills just in early development. So, and of course, people can argue against me making all these stereotypes or archetypes and stuff. I'm just saying that this thing is attacking, archetypally, it's attacking mother. Well, in effect, it's attacking mothers, and in effect, it's just leaving out fatherhood, leaving out skills, leaving out the domain of everything other than HR and therapy and stuff like that.
That could be so far in our rearview mirrors that it's actually, we need prodding to remember that, the issue of fatherhood. And I agree with you, because I think some of the sisters' parents I've spoken to, the fathers are more involved. But that's more like when the kid's 13 and whatever, and the father is in a position where he feels like he can come in and say, okay, we're going, whatever, fishing, rock climbing, or not necessarily something that's stereotypically like male pursuit, but, we're doing something, and you're going to learn something, and you're going to exercise and all the rest of it. Yeah. And I think it's also interesting that, to say it's quite common now that you would hear people saying things like, well, it doesn't matter if you grow up in a family without a father. I don't know how many people would say that with the word mother in it. And I react quite strongly to that, because I'm the son of a widow, so I know what it's like to grow up without a father. And I don't think we should, I think we're too ready to accept this idea that ultimately it just matters whether you have a mother, and it doesn't really matter whether there's a father. It's kind of like a bolt-on, like, you buy the package, and maybe you want the cable TV as well. But it's not the end of the world if you don't have it. And I do think we're quite cavalier about that. And...
So
That's not. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
with that as kind of a launching point, what do you think? What do you think is a good way for men to be involved proactively and productively with regards to children and child transition? And what can we be saying and speaking to and bringing to the table?
What men or fathers specifically?
I think, well, fathers, but also men. I mean, to go back what we were saying about men's role in this, you see two things. You see men. And this is really straw manning, but I see this quite often. Where are the men? Why aren't men speaking up to this? And then when men do speak up to it, we're like, why did you say that word? You can't speak that way. Get out of our business. You know, I've been told like, why are you in radfem media? You shouldn't be in
Yeah,
radfem media.
yeah.
Go away. I'm like, well, what are you talking about? It's media's media. Anyway, so you have this, where are the men? And then, so anyways, that aside, but just as a man or speaking to the skill sets and the needs that we have and the drives that we have that give us a unique perspective. What are some of the things that you see with how fathers have been helpful, how men have just brought some masculinity into this, and how that would be helpful for kids?
I think the starting point would be information, get informed. And I would say that to somebody like in your position or my position who doesn't have a kid going through this but is an interested party with a view. And I would also say that to a father going through this, because I think if you come into this and you don't have that network of facts and contacts ready, then you're very isolated. So in your case, like, let's make this practical. In your case, you would be able to fight back very cleanly against that and say, hold on a minute, I've interviewed detransitioners at a time when nobody else is really interviewing detransitioners, nobody with much of a platform. So you could make those arguments on the basis of work that you have done to get informed and to listen to other voices, male and female. And I would make the same argument for the father, that if the father has actually taken the time to really not just hear, but listen very closely to what the mother is saying and other people as well who are affected by it, he's going to be in a much less assailable position simply through being informed. Because if he kind of blunders in and he hasn't done as much learning. I mean, the classic pattern here would be that the mother stays up till 3 o'clock in the morning reading research papers from the Netherlands and doing all this research, and the father's kind of like, it will blow over, it will blow over. And very often it kind of will hit him that it's not going to blow over 3 days before the surgery. Now, that's the classic pattern. I'm not saying that's all cases. And I think that when fathers have informed themselves and listened, they're able to speak with much more certainty in their voices, because they know that they're speaking not for the women in their lives or their children, but with. Now, you could argue that's not true in the case of the child, but, I don't think children know what's in their best interest. So
That's a brash statement. That's pretty ideological of you. Children don't know what's best for themselves?
what does that make me? Does that make me a conservative, I suppose?
I don't know. Some sort of phobe, I'm sure.
Am I an infophobe? An
Infophobe?
infant phobe? A child
Well,
phobe?
self-determined infophobe. We would have to go to Ray Blanchard and string a whole bunch of Latin terms together and mash it together.
Okay, we'll park that. No, I stand by that. I don't think kids know what's in their best interests. I think that I wouldn't want people to interpret that as me saying kids don't know themselves better than their parents, because sometimes they do. Sometimes kids do know themselves better than the parents know them. Kids keep secrets from a young age, and often, they've got very good self-knowledge, but I don't think that they know what's in their best interests. And I think that there's less argument that they do today than there was yesterday.
Yeah, I think that I was not rushing to agree with you because I was trying to find the caveat, and the caveat is with how you phrased it. We're not speaking to them; we're speaking with them. We're not speaking for them; we're speaking with them. And so, a co-development of the skills of knowing what a child wants. If the parent doesn't do that, if the church doesn't do that, the school will do that. The internet will do that. Somebody's going to do that. Somebody's going to teach the child how to know themselves. And so, how do we go about knowing oneself? So the parent actually has to do the work on, wait, do I know what I want? And actually have some time wrestling with oneself, and then be able to carry that over. And so within all these different ideologies, and we all have to have an ideology to lean on, some sort of scaffolding within certain churches. Within every church or every religious tradition, that's actually what it is the accretion of knowledge encoded through narrative. I think basically that would be what a religion is. So there are here's what we don't. The parent might not know all the ins and outs of everything, but there are hints and stuff within that. And then schools have their pedagogies, and we know that the pedagogies are captured. And no matter what you think about religion itself, what's going on in the schools is a new religion. It's just as much as a religion, and it's not tested through time, and it's using an entire generation to test itself. It's a science experiment, and it's a ideological experiment. So there's that, and then there's probably therapy and all these other things.
Well, there's also Douglas Murray uses the term wobbly hierarchy, which I think is a really nice way of putting it. That there's this wobbly hierarchy that sits above a lot of people in schools and in like arts institutions and all the rest of it, and possibly in churches as well. And in the nuclear family, you don't have that massive overhang, but I think parents do have to be able to take control. I mean, there's a really simple way to put this, which is that if you look at the kids who, let's say the 14, 15-year-olds, and they've desisted, and you ask their parents what they did, and you compare that to what the parents of the kid who didn't desist and has become more and more miserable and more obsessed with the hormones and all the rest of it, there's a pretty clear difference, which is that the parents of the kids who desisted put their foot down. They worked together. They were on the same page, mother and father, and they put their foot down. They took the devices away. They booked the holiday. They pulled the kid out of that school and said, I don't care that you want to stay at that school. You're coming out that school. You're going into this other school. I mean, it's easy for me to say as somebody with no kids, right? I'm just kind of looking in from the outside and saying, this is how you should parent, which is not terribly useful because there's no evidence I could do it, but I can see what it is.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Sinead and Helena specifically, and I know other Grace and a lot of the detransitioners. Some of them, their parents put their foot down. Some of them were just so headstrong that you couldn't do that, and then they had to just do the hard knock thing and say, wait, what am I doing? What's going on? And so there is putting the foot down, but there's also building and instilling the capacity for a child to just think through things critically, to test their assumptions.
Clear and say two things. One, I'm not in a position to give people advice, and the other thing I would say is that difference that I just articulated is very much for the early adolescent. I think as soon as you get to 15, 16, 17, it's a whole different thing, because the kid has got a lot more autonomy whether you like it or not. I'm talking about like the 12, 13, 14 band, where that's a very clear pattern. I think that it's a lot harder. And I mean, I don't know, but I would guess that the average age of a kid that we represent would be 17. And that's tough. That's tough. A lot of them would say, I wish this had happened when she was 12. Because they feel like by 14 they would have got through it. Whereas if it all starts at 16, it's a different game. Yeah.
So
I don't know how old Helena was.
Late teens. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I spoke with her
Yeah.
when she was 21 or 22, but it was a couple years ago, I think, 3 years ago now. Time is weird. Oh, time is just so weird.
But all is not lost. I think there's lots of good news going on at the minute. I
Yeah, let's
think
switch
there's
gears.
lots of
What's some
interesting
good? Yeah,
stuff.
what's some interesting, good stuff? Easter eggs, rainbows, Christmas
Well,
presents, Boxing Day for gender.
this is gonna sound really coy, but there's stuff I can't tell you.
Oh, okay.
In the sense that there's kind of machinations going on where
Yeah.
it's the sort of thing where if you said a name, there are certain people who are faltering, but if you said their name, it would put them in a position where, I'm talking about certain clinicians, essentially.
Okay. Yeah.
And then there's some stuff I can certainly say a lot more openly without sounding like a fool, which is like, for example, we had Laura Edwards-Leeper, Marcy Bowers, and Erica Anderson, all of whom were at WPATH, coming out and saying,
And
there's
just
a
for
big
the
problem here.
passersby, WPATH is the major
Yeah,
organization that set up the
sorry.
rules for proper treatment, more or less, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It's
more or
kind of like
less.
an
Yeah, let's say that.
advisory kind of a medical advisory kind of board, right?
So it's the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, and so these are three very senior figures who have all come out in a very condensed period of time, which doesn't necessarily mean it's coordinated, but certainly it feels like a moment. Let's put it like that. And they've all come out at the same moment and spoken to Abigail Schreier. Two of them did, and have come out and said, there's a big problem here. And there are others that we know of who are going through similar moments where those who are in the know, kind of behind the scenes, are kind of frantically WhatsApping one another, saying it's almost like the scene at the end of The Italian Job where the bus is teetering on the cliff and you're kind of like, nobody move, because it could go one way or the other, you know. There are lots of things like that. There's a clinic which just closed in Dallas where we don't know why yet, but the scuttlebutt is that it's not to do with, well, it's certainly not to do with financial viability or anything like that. And it's to do with fear that people are starting to look at this and really, you know?
I think that that's true. It's true. It's true on a lot of different fronts. In America, the response to certain very recent events is so out of line with what most people think is proper with regards to the rule of law and things of that nature, and let's just say protecting oneself from imminent threat, and the way that the so-called the forces, the ideological narrative trickles down from on high, the celebrities and the different media things with regards to racial matters is not adding up to the ballot box here, and is going to.
No, the
And
umbrella is no longer being held over the head. It's kind of off in some other direction and the raindrops are falling anyway. Yeah,
wait, did you just
there's a
go
sort of
from a
narrative
Michael
failure.
Caine reference to a Julie Andrews reference? Is that what we're doing? We're just casing around these blonde Brits of very
It's
musical and
entirely possible.
charismatic
I am gay, so
persuasion.
I wouldn't actually have conscious knowledge of accessing Julie Andrews. That would just be something which would just happen. Um, yeah, I think that, yes, I agree with you about that. And I think that nobody wants to say this is the tipping point,
Yeah.
because it may not be.
It's just
And
so
it's also
untenable, and
possible.
I just don't think
Yeah.
that with regards to children, specifically in America, what switched some races or was probably responsible for some losing of democratic stronghold was because of the racial stuff in schools and the gender stuff in schools. And the people who are for this stuff are so this whole cancel culture thing and the way that they've proceeded to gain power by killing voices. They have not they've completely blinded themselves to reality, and I think that time will tell. It's untenable, and I wish that they are completely embarrassed and dragged through the mud for the absolutely despicable ways that they've enabled the destruction of our society's fabric, families, and the bodies of children. It's just so beyond the pale. And so, rare moment of me
I
being vindictive. But there you go.
I do and I don't. I think I do and I don't. I think it depends on when you catch me. I think, yeah, sometimes I would totally associate with that. And then there would be other days where I would say, you know what? It's kind of, it's a bit like, I mean, Stella's always going on I shouldn't say that. Stella is always making the comparison with the situation in Northern Ireland, right? Where there came a point where a lot of people got to the moment where they said, you know what, I actually don't have the energy for revenge anymore. I just want this to end.
Yeah, yeah.
There's an interesting question of, there's going to be a lot of parents who affirmed their kids into a trans identity and medicated the kid, and they're going to realize, because the gender euphoria is going to wear off after 5 years. Then after 10 years, it's going to become clear that, like, relationship, dating pool, what kind of person is going to be attracted to you. And there's the whole thing of the amount of energy that you put into transition and the amount of time, and then that detracts from your career development, your academic development. And there's a real question, what are we going to do? What are we going to say to those parents? Are we going to say, you should have listened, I told you so, you were encouraging my child? Or are we going to say, come on in, the water's warm? You're late, but the water's still warm.
With regards to professionals, teachers, therapists, doctors, media, celebrities, etc., that's who my ire is directed to. I think that the karmic payload of the parents caught up in this is going to be so devastating that they actually earn my sympathy, even though I'm shaking my head right now. Like I would never want to be in their shoes. I mean, that, just imagine the devastation of having the wool lifted up your eyes after doing that to your child's body. Like, wow. It's like that's how like I feel bad for Tony Soprano, like I don't want him to die, but I don't wish vengeance upon him, because like I kind of see and sympathize with him.
I agree with that, because I think parents, this could be happening. I mean, there's a pattern which is kind of established now where a kid, like, how would I phrase this? I don't have evidence for this. This is anecdotal, so I should stress that. But that the young trans-identified kids overrepresented within that cohort are those who have been bereaved of a sibling. So basically, like, there's a boy and a girl, the girl dies, and then 6 months later, the boy starts to announce that he's a girl. So you don't have to be a master psychologist to work out what might be going on there. And then, so if you're a parent in that situation, I mean, where do you even start? And I think that it would be very foolish to assume the worst of every parent who affirms, because we don't know what those, there could be domestic violence, there could be serious illness, there could be all kinds of things going on. Yeah, I agree with you with regard to the therapists. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll do we'll get our crosses ready for them then. That wasn't a Jesus Christ. That was a Spartacus. That was a Spartacus reference, not Jesus Christ.
Okay, it wasn't 3 crosses on the top of a hill. That's good to know. I suppose I'm in a good mood, because tonight, if you asked me tonight, I would say, I would just speed us towards whatever ends this. Yeah. But then I don't have a kid going through this, so I might have a very different answer. It's an interesting debate about the value of forgiveness, because forgiveness comes at a cost.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know what? Ultimately, like, I'm not the judge of anybody. And I mean, even to actually bring up Jesus, he said, it's better to tie a millstone around your neck and throw yourself off a bridge than to harm a child. So I'm sure that there's things will sort themselves out, but but the lying and the media and the medical institution, it's just awful. There's no forgiveness for that. Well, there's reform for sure. There needs to be reform, and I'm sure that most of the doctors that are doing this stuff will completely get away with it and will not pay at all in any sort of material way for what.
Yeah, they'll pivot. They'll
Yeah.
they'll pivot.
Yeah.
They'll pivot onto trans kids are real, trans kids are endangered, we have to respect trans kids, but we're over-diagnosing the number of trans kids, and then they'll stay there for a while, and then they'll just kind of shuffle off and try and see if they can get away without talking about it, essentially. Because the next logical point is it's the same point as to detransitioners. It's that they're told, well, you weren't really trans, and then but our side has been pointing out for some time it's literally semantically empty to be trans. It's just I say the words I am trans and then I am trans, essentially.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah.
So the true trans, some kids are trans, but unfortunately we've overestimated the numbers, and that's why there's a problem. That argument is not going to hold water for very long at all, even in the public who don't know about any of this, I think.
Yeah. And again, we have to say this every time we speak about this. There's a difference between adults and children, and where we draw the line between adult and children is open to debate. But what we're talking about here specifically is under 18, is actually not developmentally fulfilled individuals. And humans.
Yeah, I wouldn't put that number at 18. I agree with your definition of developmentally fulfilled. I wouldn't put it at 18.
25, 16, it's an open question.
25. There's precedent. I don't know about in America. There's precedent for that in UK law, which is that if you die before your kids and you have a large estate, usually the kid does not receive that until 25. Because if you give like an 18-year-old, £671,000, that's probably not a good move. Whereas by 25, they might have some idea of how to spend that money in a way which is going to, stand them in good stead for the future. Yeah. So it's not like 25 is just some made-up number. There is precedent to consider that an age, in the sense that 21 is an age and 22 isn't. That we have these legal milestones, and there is a reason to consider 25 like that. Yeah. Yes, I agree with you. It is different for adults and it is different for kids. There are similarities. There are personality traits which make you more likely to think about gender and to seek transition. And there's not really any evidence. Well, there's certainly some commonality across the, from the kid to the adult of those traits. I think most detransition people, or people like Corinna who are ambivalent transition people, would probably accept that. I think I would put it forward as a proposition. I think they would accept that there are traits that make you more likely to do this, which are not going to stop once you hit a certain age, and they don't start only when you've hit a certain age. They are to do with who you are.
And so it's just there's child transition as a specific issue. Then there's just transition itself for adult transition, and then there's the women's rights issue, which is something. So the child and the women. A lot of people say I'm in it to protect the women and children, but you're also talking about the men, and where do we fit into that? It's still an open question. Like, what are men to do about this? How are we to help? What are we not protecting? Is it not some sort of ethical responsibility for us to be invested into the generation, and then in protecting our families and our society from this? So that's not a question that's very much spoken about in this conversation. And as men,
city, I would say city planning. Nearly all city planners throughout history have been men. City planning comes into this, without question. Definitely, this is such a suburban phenomenon. It's
Really?
so suburban. Oh yeah, God yeah. It's much less likely to happen if you live in like a small kind of village, like I don't know, like coastal Maine or something. If you're in a village of like I don't know 120 people, and it's much less likely to happen. Okay, there could be other factors here, but it's much less likely to happen if you're living in like I don't know, like Brooklyn or something. This is tends to be people who are living in McMansion type suburbia,
Hmm.
and these kids can't walk anywhere. They can't walk anywhere.
Mm. And there's
So
no
they
forest
can't
to
go out and
play in
see their
either.
friends.
So it's just like the
That's,
worst of both worlds.
there's no natural environment to play in. There isn't even an urban environment to to explore and to own. I personally think that that's
Interesting.
responsible for some of the ethnic gap here, because obviously this is a very white phenomenon. But then what's white? Suburbia, right? Um,
Hmm.
so I know that's a weird answer, but it's not that weird when you think about it, because city planning, particularly in the US, the land of the car, now play, autonomy for kids is all gone, and you're just ferried from one place to the next
Yeah.
place and
It's
then
all
back again
mitigated.
in a
Yeah.
car. Yeah, mitigated by a parent, dependent on a
And
parent, and all the rest of
technology.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you could see that as a male response, as just one of a number of things. Is how do we develop our society? I mean, we're getting in trouble here because we're implying that only men should do city planning, but you know, there's all sorts of things to do with the way our societies develop, which are male dominated. Tech would be another one. Like most people who work in tech are males.
Are we going to do
You
the
know,
gamer socks thing again that Grace and Corinna brought up? Maybe that was off camera. They brought that up off camera. There's this thing called gamer socks because it's some sort of trope that coders tend.
uh-huh.
There's a large representation of transgender coders, and so they post a lot of
Oh yeah,
photos of
yeah, yeah.
themselves in these long, thigh high, stripy socks from some sort of anime thing or something else.
I
So
can see it now. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's definitely a thing. And do we want our society? I mean, when it comes to free speech, do we want our society to be mediated by 24-year-old
hmm,
kids of any kind? And then particularly like, that if you imagine that stereotype, like that gamer character, you're not coming up with in your head an archetype of somebody who is overburdened with friends. These are the people. It's kind of, if I was pushing it, I'd kind of say it's 26-year-old virgins making all the decisions now. I
hmm,
wouldn't want to go quite that far, but
hmm.
with regard to free
Well, I mean, if
speech
you
and
look at the
censorship,
if you look at the composition of various different protests, you're probably talking about 26-year-old virgins. At least in Portland and what happened with the Netflix thing.
yeah, I
And then
think
the
there's a
women and then
yeah.
the women that have a cause, that repent motherfucker. I don't know if you saw that video of the Chappelle protest where that comic stands up and says, "I love jokes, I love Chappelle," and then the
He's
entire
got a
media
weapon. He's
apparatus.
got a weapon.
Yeah, he's got a weapon, and then the media apparatus is like, this guy comes up and disrupts this peaceful protest. And there's this woman shaking a tambourine saying, "Repent, motherfucker! Repent, motherfucker!" It's like, where are we? How did we loop back? Or how did this become Westboro Baptist Trans Church? Like, it's just this weird,
I
weird
read.
thing.
I probably have said this to you already, but I read far left all the way through to far right. I spend quite a lot of my time looking at what the actual far right is saying. By far right, I don't mean like Breitbart. I mean seriously hardcore far right.
Yeah,
And there's this whole thing now where they've all gone monarchist. They're all like, this happened because of equality and egalitarianism, and the revolution was a mistake, and you need an aristocracy, goddammit, and you need the monarch, and like all this weird, like, southern secessionist Texit, but with like a Texan monarch. It's crazy that nobody's seeing this, because the thing is, the media thinks that far right is like Fox
white.
or Breitbart or
Yeah.
something, and it's not. When you look at the real hardcore, and I do this on the left as well. I look at the real left, like the completely
They
bonkers,
want
get
a
rid of
dictator
money.
too, you think? Too?
Oh
So I
yeah,
mean, it
yeah,
loops back around to authoritarian on the compass.
yeah,
Then, yeah.
yeah, yeah. But that's what the effect of somebody like the repent motherfucker woman. That's what it's getting to. Is it's just driving the people who were already quite extreme. It's just like they've fallen off the edge now, and they're coming back round the other side.
Kind of monarchy. Jeez Louise.
The king of Texas.
Yeah, what, Joe Rogan? Who would be king of Texas? It's not going to be a Bush.
No, I don't think they'd get. I don't think they'd have him. I don't see him being in the running. I don't know who they have in mind. Yeah,
So
it's
with
interesting
that
time.
with that said, yeah, with that said, on a political level, backing away from gender, like what are your interests beyond that? Like if you were to cast your opinionated walkie-talkie voice into conversation around greater political issues, what's really fascinating you, or something that you're teasing apart and trying to investigate?
I'm very interested in things like the Greater Idaho movement, and I don't know if you know, but there's also this plan basically to get rid of nearly all of Illinois, like to hive half of it to Indiana, another bit, the bottom bit to Kentucky, and then the rest of it to Missouri. And then what else is there? There's Wexit, so which is West Virginia absorbing the Shenandoah Valley, and also now the three, let me get this right, westernmost counties of Maryland are talking about going into West Virginia. And this is kind of interesting to me because this is the kind of thing you can't do in Europe. Nobody ever, it doesn't really make sense to kind of say, let's move this bit of Germany into France. It's not a
Yeah,
conversation you'd
I
ever
want
have because they're very,
Luxembourg.
yeah. Well, the Germans have been known to say that.
Exactly.
Whereas in America, in America, this is the kind of thing that could actually happen. It could conceivably happen. And with the Greater Idaho, I think you're not in an area which is
I think
going
it
to
would be
be
just
imminently
south of me.
absorbed.
They tried. They want a coastal. They want the coast,
Yeah,
so they're trying to figure out a way to get to the
of
coast. And
course.
the problem is that the
Yeah.
Cascades, the Cascadia separates the blue areas from the red areas from the blue areas, right? So the blue areas would be Democrat,
Mhm.
which would be Portland up to Seattle, up to Bellingham, up to Vancouver, and then everything past the Cascades is farmland and stuff like that. So which includes Idaho. So Idaho wants to kind of absorb all that red territory, but the problem is that they would need they would be landlocked, which would kind of screw them
Mhm.
economically. So if they can cut up the Columbia River, I think is their plan, and the blue sides the blue sides like piss off. So we'll see what
Is it going
happens.
to happen? I assume it's not going to happen.
I mean, there was a state of Jeffersonian where Jeffersonian, I think, or Jefferson State, Northern California and Southern Oregon. There was clamoring about that because their water is just being basically stolen by LA, and they don't have any
Mhm.
say over it because of the way that the state power is just taking their resources and not really. I don't know. I don't know the entire ins and outs of that, but there's also ideological differences between Northern and Southern California. So it's an open question, right? But it's like, well,
I
if
think it's interesting. I think it's unlikely to any of these things. I don't know how likely they are to happen, but I think after your last election, there was obviously quite a lot of people who were a little bit upset. That's called British understatement, and I don't think that secession or a national divorce. I mean, my understanding is
no, with
there's
nuclear
literally
weapons, I
no
don't think
legal
it would.
mechanism for that to happen. Whereas this whole states moving, counties moving, could, I think it's more likely to happen, and that could really shift things. I mean, it could shift things economically for you, certainly, in a very big way.
There are some pretty big. There are a lot of different ways for us to counter the problems that we're facing that are not civil war, but would be a certain low level sort
Of
of
course.
not
Yeah.
disturbance, but reshuffling of the civic order in order to allow people to have more agency with regards to their voting and stuff like that. So it's an open question, but the powers that be are the powers that be, and they suck.
Yeah, well, then there's similar stuff you can notice in the UK. It's not the same thing, but there's an argument. David Starkey made this argument that not all, a lot of the places which voted to leave the EU are places which had their town council or their county council merged away, stripped away over the years, merged into a bigger unit and a bigger unit and a bigger unit, and they'd lost sovereignty. In many ways, they lost decision-making power. Places that in the Industrial Revolution really had the ability to specialize in a particular trade or particular industry, and now that's kind of all gone. And he draws a very clear line and says these are all the places with the empty town halls. So I guess there's a general point I would make, which is that I think a lot of people are very interested in the big, in the macro. They're interested in the stuff that they hear that's probably never going to go anywhere. And they're losing sight of the micro and the local level stuff, which could be more interesting.
No,
Could be more fruitful.
ultimately that's how I've been thinking ever since. I think over the past year since I interviewed Joshua Mitchell, who's an American conservative and a Tocqueville scholar, and I got into Tocqueville, which is about how America kind of was formed from the bottom up, and when you think about the problems that we face, most of the solutions are just show up to school board meetings, show up to those stupid ass city council meetings, and get organized and get connected, and then work on that level. And actually, from what I gather from the great stream of blue wave salt, they're really afraid that Bannon is doing that now. The Trump advisor who's on the January 6th, they're going to try to take him out via the January 6th baloney. The whole thing is just a stupid. The whole thing. But he's organizing grassroots. Just go through grassroots, school boards, grassroots. A lot of the so-called conservative and libertarian and liberal, classical liberal, we're all pointing. We're all trending towards let's take back what we have power over, and paying kind of less attention to the macro, even though it's got to be a back and forth between macro action and micro thinking, kind of going back and forth between what's the issue that everybody's talking about, and then how does it affect me personally, my family personally, and stuff like that. And I think that a lot what we're talking about with gender is getting back into the family, is parents being much more attentive to what's happening with their children and being much more psychologically invested in that, and then trying to overshadow the influence of this macro ideology that's just kind of spreading through the internet.
Macro, like multiple applications of macro, because it's so global. And yeah, I agree with that. And I think that it's more interesting to look at America because it's more precarious as a culture at the moment. But I think that also you have more, because you're a younger society than old world societies, as you say, there are lots of things that can be done to avoid conflict. Whereas I think if you look at what's going on in countries like Italy right now, it's not a very happy land, and there aren't those kind of, there isn't a history of town hall democracy that you can speak of particularly. That's not what binds Italians together. What binds Italians together is being Italian, as an ethnic group, which is not the same situation as America. So I suppose I find America more interesting in that sense, in that it's higher stakes right now.
Yeah. Well, we have better guns. Well, we have guns, so of course it's going to be higher stakes.
Yeah, I know you've been showing them us on your media.
Wait, me?
Recently with your riots and so forth.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a hot button issue.
Well, and I think, it's that weird thing is that, if you listen to a family in crisis over gender, you take gender out of it and everything, a lot of the time, the rest of the time, everything is fine, more so with the younger kids. And it's the same kind of thing that I think a lot of the issues that Americans are getting very angry about, actually, if they're not at the front of their mind, there are lots of things about American society which are functioning just fine. I think inflation is going to be something which may not be fine and may be ubiquitously not fine, because that can change everything if inflation runs away. But we could all be facing that, as far as I understand it.
Yeah, we're pretty enmeshed. We're pretty enmeshed on that level, our countries.
Yeah, yeah. It's not going to be, yeah. Apart from maybe the Swiss. They usually get away with it, don't they?
With inflating shit?
Well,
it's
just
so
kind
expensive
of
there. I visited a couple of years ago. So freaking expensive. It's insanely expensive. $40 for a plate of like melted cheese and cookie dough or something like that. It's like, what are you trying to do?
I think that's their national dish. You may just have insulted. Yeah, it is. But then on the other hand, it's like I don't know what the average income is, but it's a lot higher than the average European country. So it all goes up relatively. You know, yeah. They might be all right. They tend to float like a cork on the waves of... Huh. Yeah, usually. They got through World War II okay.
And World War I, right? Well, I
think my understanding of Switzerland was actually quite poor until quite recently. We think of it as really rich. I don't think it was...
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they were just kind of doing herding and stuff in World War One.
Yeah, cheesy things.
Mm-hmm.
I think somebody was bringing up them with regards, I don't know. People bring up the Nazis quite a lot in modern discourse. Everybody's got like a Nazi reference that they can drop at the
yes.
Yeah. So my recent one, I don't know if you've seen, was imagine a alternate timeline where every university had a department that was dedicated to denying the reality of the Holocaust. Like, instead of denying the reality of biological sex. And if it was a short story, it was called Gender Switch, which only works if you read it. Gender Switch.
You have to spell it now.
Gender, SCHWITZ. Like the...
Okay, that's nearly Switzerland in German.
Well, it's more. Okay. Well, it's actually technically a place in Poland that I'm riffing on. Anyways, that was my stupid Holocaust joke, and I only brought that up because I had a Jewish humorist on, so I'm like, oh, I can. And he said I could do a Holocaust joke if it was funny, but
was that Aaron Flam by any chance?
Aaron
Not that
Flam,
there's only one Jewish humorist. Okay,
really?
Aaron Flam's very interesting. Yeah,
no,
he's Swedish Jewish.
Humorist.
Kind of very right of center. Yeah, and a humorist. Huh. Yeah,
I didn't know they had humorists in Sweden. I thought they were just a happy people. They didn't need to specialize.
I think it's difficult to tell whether they have humorists. I think they have to tell you whether they're humorous. He's so deadpan and flat. You wouldn't. Yeah, you'd have to listen to him quite carefully. He's funny though. Yeah. Would you have, if you had kids, would you even send them to university?
Oh, well, university, like, would I even send them to public school? That would be the question. I mean, at this point. School in my area seems okay, but it's particularly, I mean, all of our purse strings and therefore all of our pedagogy has to be run through the state, which is incredibly left-leaning. Our state is so screwed. They're literally teaching CRT and this gender stuff and socially transitioning children if they want, and we'll hide that from the parents. Like, it's just like we're so far left politically, like on the that it's just like, to what degree will it not trickle down to the rural schools that don't go along with it? We do.
I know a detransitioner who lives near you. I think he lives relatively near you, and it's not good. Yeah. There's no. It's not even that there's no barrier anymore. It's almost that you're kind of pressure washed into certain ways of being, and it's terrible for people who are bisexual or homosexual, I don't know. I really fear for them because
Hmm.
how they're going to come to a normal conceptualization of their own sexuality. I don't know. I just don't know. I don't see how they can do that in somewhere like Portland.
Hmm.
I don't mean to pick on it. I know it's become a cliche, but I don't know how they come to a normal construal of that in time.
I don't know.
I don't know what it is. Yeah, what it is we can do to help them, if anything.
I mean, I just wish we could roll back to pre-Pride days. Like, ultimately, just take all the good, take the best, and leave the rest, and completely, keep all the rights, keep all the not the normalization, but just the non-hate stuff. Keep the chillness with regards to non-heterosexual sexualities, and just roll back the entire social push. Just roll back all the flags, all the months and days, and all the the season. Canada has a pride season. Just put that all back. That
Which
should not
season
be.
is it?
It's between June and September. They've declared as pride season in Canada.
The
It's not enough to have
whole
a.
of summer.
Yeah, it went from a weekend to a week to a month, and then the whole summer is Pride Summer. So, and then every other day is a Trans Remembrance Day or Trans Disinvisibility Day or something like that. Which I don't know why they need so many days, but they get them all,
That's
as
when
many
we
as they
held our
need.
conference on
Oh yeah,
Trans Day of Visibility. Yeah, why not?
why not? You guys
Well,
getting out,
because
making visible.
one of the parents we represent lost a child after transition to suicide, and it's kind of like,
Mm.
well, surely we should remember that as much as any other story. Yeah, but like you say, I mean, if you said I'm going to avoid all of these days, there's not that many left, and I don't really understand. Yeah, I take your point. It would be nice if we could go back, but given that we can't, I suppose there's going to have to be something a bit more explosive to push back and to get people to understand, particularly same-sex attracted people. You don't have to go down this road, and it's not going to make you happy in most cases. I think there are exceptions to that, which I do kind of feel like I have to take at face value.
Well, I appreciate how both Andrew Doyle and what was the very beautiful man? What's his name? You already brought him up in the conversation. Douglas Murray. How they
Have you got a
completely.
boy crush on Douglas Murray?
No, he posted a photo on Twitter that made him look like a donut. So I like to joke about how beautiful he is.
Okay,
I'll send you the
fair.
photo. It's so
Dude,
intensely Dorian Grayish. It's like beyond the pale. Anyways,
he has a
so
huge amount of poise. There's something about him. He's a very
yes,
poised person.
and so if we're to consider what is happening in this cultural right now. Uh, anyway, so but they like, yeah, okay, yeah, I'm gay. Who the fuck cares about it? It's just like that. That's my own. That's my own thing. That has nothing to do with anything. It's not my community. It's not my identity. It's just my sexuality. That's not front and center of my life. So I think that there's some sort of drawing back to say that this is not going to define you. It will define your romantic relationships and your the way that you move around a certain aspect of your life, but that's not your career. That's not your personality. That's not the basis on which you build an individuality. That's nothing like that has anything to do with your will or your skill. And so saying that there is a place for this and it's cool and explore it and be safe and understand that this is what's going on, but it's not it's not like take it out of the bio. It shouldn't
Yeah,
be
but
in your bio. I don't,
the
and
difficulty is
here's a
that
white privileged blah 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 guy saying that. But
I think the problem is that there are lots of gay people who are older, and it is their personality. Which is a bit pitiful, but there are quite a lot of people like that,
hmm,
and and so they can kind of point to that, and so it's difficult to see a
I
way to get
understand
through
that.
this without
Yeah.
really going on the offensive. And then
In what
and then it
respect?
doesn't help. It doesn't help that you've got Milo Yiannopoulos selling 7-inch high statues of the Mother Mary on the Christian, whatever it is,
Well, he's
Christian
not gay anymore.
QVC, right?
He retracted that.
No, strange that I should have forgotten.
Wait, hold on. Are we do I have to hide your face again because nobody can see just how dry your the way you looked at me was right now. So
I would appreciate it if you hid my face. Yes.
okay. All
Yes.
right. So just to
Yeah.
let people know that he gave me a very particular, very dry look. Not quite Swedish humorous dry, but it was pretty.
Well, my voice wasn't flat enough for Swedish humorous territory. Yeah. I mean, whatever makes him happy, I don't mind. But I think that I suppose I'm making the point that even when he's sort of trying to triangulate against a version of himself he created, and it's just the same thing. It's just a mirror image of the same thing. I think if it was done in earnest, if you kind of built a career on being the dangerous faggot, to use a quote, can I say that? Or you can edit that out if you want, but yeah, we'll see. Note down the time. But he built a career on being a provocative homosexual, and you kind of think, well, if you really, it's a bit like Meghan Markle saying, "I'm going to move to Hollywood to get away from the publicity." You think if you really want to, you probably would just want to go into a more private space. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have much hope I don't have much hope that side of things is going to be resolved very soon. The whole disentangling of gender and sexuality. I think that's going to take a while.
Well, and that's why you were motivated to do this work, and that's why it's such interesting conversation to kind of push back against assumptions and complicate narratives and say not all this, not all that, and this is how this is affecting this, and this is how affecting that, and
it's why I thought I was motivated to do this work.
Oh, you have a different motivation now.
Maybe. I was talking to a friend, my oldest friend. It's funny, we all have versions of our history that, you have an official version that you decide on. Everyone does. And I kind of said to her, I was just telling her how I got into all of this, and because I hadn't spoken to her for a while, and because I've spoken to so many people about this, I've sort of developed a spiel, I'm sure you have a spiel, about what you do. And I said, funny thing is, I don't know if I ever told you this, but actually when I was younger, I did occasionally think it would be easier to be a girl, or I'd rather be a girl. And she said, you told everyone that literally all the time, every day. And I completely earnestly had edited that from, I didn't think that was true at all. I remember one conversation where I said that to somebody and it being really embarrassing. But apparently I was just walking around saying that the whole time. So there you go.
Where would you be now if the 2020s happened in the 2000s?
I don't think I'd be here. As in, I don't think I would have coped. Yeah, I think I would have been. I think my mental health problems would have overtaken me.
Because of the way that you think that gender ideology would have interfaced with the state you were in at that point, in your developmental years.
100%. Yeah, without question. Without question. Because what regulated me because I knew I felt an abnormal way about my body and my future and the way I related to men, or even the concept of being a man. But I felt very ashamed of that. Thank God. So I kept it to myself. Apparently not as much as I thought, but I didn't live, it wasn't a parade. It wasn't something I wanted to share with the world. It wasn't something which I would glory in. And now it would be almost impossible not to, because they're kind of luring you with this thing of it's a prepackaged friendship group. It's stunning and brave from all of your teachers. It's all of this stuff. And
Carte
there's no
blanche with
way I
regards
would.
to how you treat people, treat other people in your life.
Yeah, well said. Absolutely. Yeah, I think so in many ways. And being able to claim that the deck is stacked against you in every single way, and people being so open to that argument, and so willing to stop what they're doing and put down whatever they're doing and turn to you and send to you. And I would have found that probably quite difficult to resist. And then I think it would have been a disaster. For a myriad reasons, which isn't to say that it is always a disaster. I think it just, in my case, yeah, it would have been a disaster. But I didn't know that when I met these parents. So it's just the way the subconscious works, right? I suppose. I suppose I felt like I had some tenuous connection to the subject. I would still never describe myself as having had gender dysphoria. Although I don't know why, when I think about it. I suppose simply because I didn't do anything about it publicly. It was all just in my head, is what would stop me saying that about myself.
And was it, if you go back and you can recall, was it more about the social level, or was it some sort of autoandrophobia kind of thing, like just a disgust of being
Oh,
a
it's the whole
male?
thing. Both, and both fully. Oh yeah, total inability to total inability to see myself as a male, as a proper male, as a potential man. That's the correct way to say it, as a potential man. Like being able to accept, yeah, okay, I'm a boy. I didn't think I was a girl, and you're as a boy, but I didn't think I could be any kind of man that was worth being, you know? And that is the internalized homophobia aspect of it.
So, as a man, how would you tell yourself that it's okay, or that there's a path for you to be a man, become a man?
God, I don't even know how I would start. I think I would drive a very, very, very long way away into a very isolated place. If I could go back in time and have a conversation with myself, I don't think I could have got anywhere in that context. I think, and I feel that about a lot of these kids. I think a lot of them need to be taken to the top of a mountain and just given some time to calm down. You know, I think that's the first thing. I was a very disturbed young person, which I feel very guilty about saying, because I think when you say that, it can sound like an attack on your family. You know, if you had a difficult adolescence, it can sound like, you know, and I'm not saying that, but what would I say? I don't think I would say anything. I think it's more about what I would do. I think that a lot of kids with internalized homophobia, they need to do things to come to terms with their body. Literally just physical activity. You know?
Like a rave or something?
Maybe not that. Maybe not the recreational drugs kind of thing. More, God, it sounds very pious and it sounds very Little House on the Prairie, but kind of, you know, exercise and productive stuff and building stuff and things like that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have done it. You'd have had to drag me kicking and screaming, which is why I kind of think that the step one is to get these kids out of this context, is to get them physically out of the context, I think.
Maybe we should
kind of
donate
convinced.
them to the Amish, and then they could do a summer-long barn raising tour across Virginia and Minnesota or wherever the Amish are spreading.
Well, my friend Renee Jacks, do you know who Renee Jacks is?
I don't know.
So he's recently detransitioned So I can say he, which is really annoying because I used to say he to annoy him when he was a trans woman. I just would say he to annoy him because he's kind of rude. And now I'm saying he, and he has actually detransitioned. So the kick has gone. It's really
Oh, shoot.
quite
Now you can call
devastating.
him she just to really rub it in.
I probably should actually. So she has this idea, which is that she wants to set up an organization which basically takes a lot of kids with gender dysphoria and puts them in tan slacks and blue polo shirt and takes them to Indonesia. And it's like dig a well, build a school, just do that. And he is convinced that will end it
Now you're having to,
for them.
to correct yourself with the pronouns.
I am because I like Renee. I like Renee. Renee detransitioned. He's a bit crazy. Some of his ideas are quite out there. He detransitioned after 36 years.
Well,
Yeah, yeah.
maybe I
At the risk of saying
should
something
have
too on the nose, really
them on.
take some ball. Yeah,
I'll have to get. I'll have to ask for his contact afterward.
too.
I need.
Yeah, he has a
I need to.
clear perspective on this.
I need to prep for my my day job and have some dinner.
Okay.
How you
Cool. It was
feel
nice
now?
talking to you.
Do you feel like we accomplished something?
Yeah, I do. Um, I think it's important the stuff we talked about motherhood.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking that
Yeah,
that was the
I
preeminent
haven't
part
kind
of the
of got
conversation.
around to that yet in my head, and it's like it's one of those things. Everyone knows it. Everyone in these circles kind of you feel it. Like there's
Yeah.
something there, and
Yeah.
I'm sure that I could have put it better, but something along those lines is a good start.
Yeah, and I want to highlight that when you brought it up, it's an attack on motherhood, but you're seeing a pattern of it coming from women and gay men. Oddly enough, it's not just standard misogyny. There's something a little twisted going on here, which isn't just
Hmm.
the patriarchy doing it, or whatever that means. There's something
No, it's bigger. It's. I don't want to say it's bigger. It's more
deeper.
all-encompassing. I don't think there's any type of person who was straight man, straight woman, gay man, lesbian who's untouched by this now. You can't say patriarchy. You can't say this is feminism. You can't say this is gay rights. This is way bigger, I think.
I know some people who would agree with you.
Hmm. Who?
Jonathan Pajot would agree with you theologically and philosophically, and then there's probably other people that would agree with you on a more conspiratorial or globalist lens, or even ideologically through critical theory or the end result of liberalism or progressivism. There's a lot of different ways to say how this is connected to so many other different things on a worldwide or at least Western-wide scale and
Hmm.
stuff. I like Jonathan Pajot's religious symbolical understanding because it's evidently symbolical. It's like it's on the surface of it. It's symbolical, so you can interpret it into meaning. Whereas if you start with the theoretical or the globalist agenda, then you end up translating it subconsciously into symbolic understanding and making a lot of stereotypical leaps or
Yeah, well, I also
seeing
think
the
it's much
forest
more
for the trees
interesting
and the
to
trees for
go
the stores.
to go in on yourself and look at it. I'm
Exactly.
more interested
That's
in the journey
ultimately,
inward.
yeah. That's
Yeah.
ultimately how I go. Yeah. Herman Hesse all the way, man. Damien, Steppenwolf. Did you ever read
You
Hesse?
should. I did not.
Oh, okay. He's post Jungian
No.
author. Great. Those are the books. I put Siddhartha into the hands of a lot of these kids. That's a very great. You should look. You should read that. It would take you a day or two. Excellent book, Siddhartha. Perfectly. It's the perfect young
Spell
adult
that for me.
Sid. Well, it's easier to say Herman Hesse, Hesse, and then try to type Siddhartha
Is in
into Google.
Siddhartha as in the name of the Buddha?
Yeah, the name of the Buddha. Yeah.
Oh,
So,
okay. I know how to spell that. Oh,
yeah.
interesting. There's so many angles that you could go off and on. You should interview Renee. Renee's, yeah, has a crap internet connection. That would be the problem that you would
Oh,
face.
okay. Yeah. I hate those so much. I hate them.
Yeah, that wouldn't be good. Yeah. Every time I try and speak to him, it's kind of wobbly, but yeah, that could be interesting. You might get a little bit of pushback. He's got some interesting views about historical events.
Huh. Maybe have interviewed them and then ended up not publishing it. How do you spell the last name?
JAX.
Jax. No. No. Unless they go by a pseudonym. You know what is,
No,
Angus?
that is the pseudonym.
Mr. Fox.
It was lovely to talk to you.
Good time. Thanks for joining me again. I would ask you to wave to the camera, but it doesn't matter, so I'm gonna have to put in some sort of GIF.
I may. I'll see. I'll see how things go. I may
come out of the closet. Part 2, 2.0. Closet leaper.
I may do, and I may not. Every time I kind of,
yeah.
I don't know. I can, look at what happened. Not that I'm fucking comparing myself to J.K. Rowling, but look at what happened with J.K. Rowling. She's got her address all over the internet and all the rest of it. You can see why people don't, but I don't know. Yeah. There it is.
Yeah. You have to make decisions for yourself and your family. And the rest of us just have to abide by them.
He says with a note of self-pity. All right, thank you very much for having me then.
All right, bro.
Have a nice day.
Talk soon.
See ya.
Ciao.
Bye.